Have you ever stopped to wonder why at the massive railway hubs, deep in the Urals or the frozen wastes of Zabakalya, you sometimes see trains that don't exist on any schedule? Old cars, plated in darkened, rusted iron, their windows choked by heavy velvet curtains. They sit on the siding tracks for weeks, gathering dust, only to vanish in a single night without leaving so much as a graphite smudge in the dispatcher's log. I didn't believe it. I thought they were just stories, campfire fodder for people who can't sleep in the third-class carriages to the rhythmic beat of the rails. Folklore, a way to kill time during the infinite crawl across the continent. But now, as I sit here looking at my hands, look at them. They won't stop shaking. A fine neurological tremor I can't suppress. I realize that the true stories are always the ones that sound the most insane. It started in September 2024. I was headed home from a business trip. Sverdlovsk, I still call it that. The old name feels more honest after the things I saw, greeted me with a thick, unnatural heat. It was the kind of air that precedes a disaster. Heavy, greasy, it presses against your ribs, forcing your heart into a frantic, uneven gallop for no reason at all. My train was delayed. The platform was a desert of gray concrete. Just me, my suitcase, and the sudden, sharp scent of ozone, despite the cloudless sky. At 3 a.m., the hour when reality thins out and begins to fray, the train drifted to the platform. It was silent. No screeching of metal on metal, just a ghost of a sound. Wagon, number 0. My ticket said Car 7, but only one door opened. The conductor, her face lost in the deep shadow cast by the brim of her service beret, simply nodded. I stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't the standard railway bouquet of coal smoke, dust, and cheap soap. No. Inside, it smelled of ancient copper, wet wool overcoats, and something old, as if I had stepped into a tomb that had been retrofitted with wheels and greased with oil. "Your ticket," she said. Her voice was flat, not male, not female, just a sound devoid of vibration like a recording played through a broken speaker. "I am in Car 7, but the door was locked." I tried to peer under her brim. "Proceed. Your seat is assigned. We are departing." The train moved so smoothly, I didn't feel the pull. The station lights simply began to bleed backward, stretching into long, distorted smears of yellow light. I found my compartment. It was wrong. Heavy velvet drapes, copper handles coated in thick green patina, and the lamps in the ceiling were barely glowing. They cast a jaundiced, sickly hue, and the shadows in the corners felt heavier than the objects they belonged to. You know that feeling? When you look at a corner and realize the darkness there is denser than it should be. Like it has physical mass. I threw my bag on the bunk. The air was stifling. I tried to wrench the window open, but it wouldn't budge. The handle was ice cold, despite the oppressive heat of the cabin. I sat back, leaning my head against the wall. The wheels began to drum out a rhythm. Not the usual clatter, but something broken, erratic. Like Morse code being tapped out by someone with broken fingers. That's when I felt it. Behind the upholstery of the bunk, something was tucked away, a corner of paper. I pulled it out. It was a yellowed, brittle sheet covered in tiny, meticulous handwriting. The edges were scorched. At the top, in bold, bureaucratic lettering, was a heading that made the blood turn to lead in my veins. Passenger Memorandum, Special Protocol, MGLA. I read it, and my rational mind, everything they taught me about physics and logic, began to dissolve. The paper spoke of tea, served without sugar, of shadows that could live their own lives, of passengers arriving from 1952. It read like a fever dream, like the creepypasta stories teenagers post on forums late at night. Then I looked at my own shadow. The train had cleared the Urals. Outside the window was an absolute, impenetrable void. The taiga? Maybe. No, I couldn't see a single light, not a single star. Only my own reflection in the glass, a reflection that was beginning to look like a stranger. I told myself it was a joke, a cruel prank.
The previous passenger had left a script to terrify the next guy. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my pulse. "Quiet, Andre," I whispered. "It's just an old car, atmosphere, exhaustion. Tomorrow you will laugh." To distract myself, I began to count the buttons on my shirt. 1, 2, 3. On the 4th, I heard it. A knock on the compartment door. 3 short raps, 1 long. My throat went dry. I remembered the first rule of that cursed protocol. If they offer tea without sugar, drink it. If it has sugar, do not touch it. The door slid open with a long, agonizing groan. A hand, in a navy blue uniform glove, reached into the dim light. It held a silver tea glass, a podstaconic. The metal glinted dully under the dying lamp. And the smell. God, the smell. A cloying, heavy, suffocatingly sweet scent of sugar filled the cabin, drowning out the copper and the ozone. "Your tea, comrade!" A voice drifted from the corridor. I froze. I couldn't see her face, only her silhouette, a black void against the even deeper black of the hallway. My eyes darted to the table. My shadow, cast by the hallway light, suddenly did something I didn't do. It slowly raised its hand. It pointed at the glass. I looked at the liquid inside. In the dim light, it looked black as crude oil. And it was. It was pulsing, in sync with my own heart. Thick, viscous throbs, as if there was a small, living heart beating at the bottom of the glass. "Enjoy," the shadow in the hallway whispered. The door began to slide shut. But that wasn't the worst part.
The worst part was that as the door narrowed to a sliver, I saw her eyes in the gap. They weren't human. There were 2 perfectly round white pits. No pupils, no eyelids, just emptiness, glowing from within with a dead, phosphorescent light. In that moment, I understood. Vladivostok, my destination, might not be the city I knew, if it even existed at the end of these tracks. The door slammed shut. I was left alone with a pulsating glass of black tea. The silence in the car became so loud, I started to hear whispers. Hundreds of voices behind the walls, in the partitions, under the floorboards. They were calling my name. I remembered the manual. Asterisk, if the silence becomes too loud, begin reciting the articles of the USSR Constitution out loud. I opened my mouth, but only a dry, rattling wheeze came out. My shadow on the wall wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was sitting on the opposite bunk, watching me intently, despite having no face. Suddenly, the train lurched. The rhythm of the wheels changed. Asterisk, tap, 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 help me. The rails screamed under the floor. I realized this was only the beginning. We had crossed the border of the world we know, and there was no turning back. Do you want to know what I did with the glass? Or do you want to hear what my shadow said to me? Wait. I hear it. Do you hear that? That sound, like something scratching against the metal on the other side of the window. Outside, at 100 kilometers an hour. I need to tell you the rest before they get through the lock. Are you listening? Tell me in the comments if you have ever smelled it. That suffocating sweet sugar in a train that shouldn't be there. I need to know I am not the only one in this zone. Tell me your city, please. I need to know how far this train has gone. Will you keep listening? My time is running out. Part 2 is already here, scratching at the inside of my skull. I have to get it out before the shadows get too long. Write continue if you are ready to look into the eyes of whatever lives in wagon number 0. Underscore 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 underscore. That scraping sound, it wasn't random. Have you ever heard a rusted nail dragged slowly across a sheet of galvanized steel with agonizing pressure? Now imagine that sound coming from the outside of a rail car screaming through the night at full speed. Outside that window, there is no ledge, no platform, only the freezing slipstream and the void. But something was clinging to the ironed skin of the train, right level with my face. I froze. The air in the compartment grew so thick with a scent of sugar, I felt I could carve it with a knife. A cloying, adhesive sweetness that clogged my nostrils and triggered a dry heave. I stared at the glass in its silver holder. Tea inside was no longer a liquid. It pulsed in time with my frantic heart. Thud, 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 thud. A viscous black ichor resembling crude oil rising toward the rim in defiance of gravity. "Don't drink it," someone whispered. I lunged back, heart hammering. The compartment was empty. My shadow, now disturbingly distinct and seemingly three-dimensional, remained seated on the opposite bunk. It slowly turned its head toward me. The shadow had no eyes, yet I felt a physical weight from its gaze, a cold, analytical study. It was waiting. I remembered the directive. Asterisk. If the tea is served with sugar, it is not tea. Do not touch the glass. Wait for the pulsation to synchronize with your pulse. Then carefully pour it into the gap between the window frame. My fingers brushed the silver podstakanik. It was searing hot. The metal vibrated, sending a needle-like tremor straight into the marrow of my forearm. Overriding a primal urge to scream, I gripped the glass. It resisted. I swear it felt as if I were uprooting something living, a heavy, stubborn weight anchored to the floor. I dragged it toward the window. The scraping outside intensified, rising to a jagged shriek. Whatever was behind the glass sensed my intent. I found the gap, a narrow slit choked with decades of gray dust. Slowly, making sure not a single drop touched my skin, I tilted the glass. The black sludge didn't flow like water. It writhed like a blind worm, lunging into the crevice as if it smelled freedom. A hiss erupted, the sound of white-hot iron quenched in ice water. The entire car shuddered. The scraping stopped with a sharp, wet thud. Something heavy tore away from the side of the train and vanished into the dark. Instantly, the sugar smell vanished, replaced by a stinging, clinical stench of bleach and scorched rubber. I collapsed onto the floor. My heart was a frantic animal in my chest, and dark spots bloomed in my vision. But the silence was worse. It pressed down on my eardrums like deep water. Even the rhythm of the wheels had changed. It was no longer a machine sound. Andre, the rail joints chanted. They knew my name. The old Soviet steel laid through the taiga decades ago was speaking to me. "God help me," I wheezed, burying my face in my hands. "There is no God here," my shadow's voice vibrated through the walls. "There is only the protocol. Observe the protocol, and perhaps you will become part of the system." I snapped my head up. My shadow was standing now. It had grown, its head pressed against the ceiling, neck bent at an impossible angle. It began to reach toward the shadow of the upper bunk, a space where a human silhouette was flickering on the wall, even though the bunk itself was empty. I remembered rule number 3, asterisk. If your shadow begins to reach for the shadow of a bunkmate,
close your eyes, and do not open them for exactly 30 minutes. I squeezed my eyes shut until it hurt. The darkness behind my eyelids felt like the only safe place left in the universe. 1, 2, 3. I began to count in my head. Footsteps echoed from the corridor, heavy, rhythmic. This wasn't the light tread of a conductor. It was the sound of jackboots on iron flooring. Bam, bam, bam.
My compartment door was slammed open. I smelled harsh tobacco, the acrid, unmistakable scent of Bellamore that stays in the lungs for years. Cold air rushed in from the hallway, carrying the faint static of a long-range radio, distant shouting, and the low hum of heavy engines. "Why are we not sleeping, citizen?" The voice was thick, authoritative, carrying a smoker's rasp. "Are we violating the quiet hours?" I didn't open my eyes. I felt this man, if it was a man, enter the room. I heard the creak of a leather sidearm holster. I heard him sit on the bunk opposite me. "I'm Captain Kolesnikov, MGB of the USSR. We have a few questions regarding your itinerary." "Open your eyes. Look at me. We're just having a conversation." I stayed silent. My lips trembled. I began to recite the articles of the Constitution in my mind, just as the memo instructed. Article 1. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is a socialist state of workers and peasants. "Drop the act, Andrei," Kolesnikov chuckled. I felt the heat of a struck match inches from my face. "That paper you found behind the panel, you realize it belongs to enemies of the state, to those who wish to sow chaos in our perfect order. Open your eyes. Look at the chessboard. One game, and I'll let you off at the next station. Sverdlovsk, 44. It is warm there. They are waiting for you. Article 2. The political foundation of the USSR is formed by the Soviets of working people's deputies." I continued, sweat slicking my spine. I felt his gaze. It was heavy like lead shot. It felt as if he were looking through me, through my very eyelids. My shadow, I could feel it through my skin, had stopped reaching and was now frozen, waiting for my resolve to break. "What time is it, citizen?" he asked suddenly. His voice snapped like a whip. It was a trap. Rule number 4. "Time has been frozen by order of the party," I croaked, eyes still fused shut. A dead silence fell over the compartment. The smell of tobacco vanished. The radio static died. Even the vibration of the train ceased for a moment, as if we were suspended in the void between seconds. Then came the laughter, a dry, cracking sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. "You think correctly. Good. But the party does not like those who know too much, especially about Wagon number 0. I heard him stand up. Footsteps moved toward the exit, but he paused at the door. "You know, Andrei, in 1952, we transported a group of scientists here. They also thought the rules would save them. Now they are the sound you hear in the wheels. Safe travels. You are almost at Vladivostok. If, of course, you can pass through the shadow." The door slid shut. I stayed there with my eyes closed, counting the seconds. 500. 600. 1,000. When I finally risked a look, the cabin was empty. The captain was gone. My shadow was back on the floor, obediently following my movements. But on the table, a chess piece sat there. A black king. It was carved from something that looked suspiciously like human bone, yellowed and aged. I looked out the window. The curtain was slightly parted. In the infinite black distance, shapes began to emerge. It wasn't the taiga. It was a city. Endless rows of gray concrete Khrushchev-style apartments stretching to the horizon. Not a single light burned in their windows. There was no sky above them, only a flat, impenetrable blackness. We were entering the zone of meaning exclusion. And then the smell changed again.
Now it was the scent of an old, dusty library. But there were no books here. I slowly turned my eyes toward the door. From under the gap, a fog began to seep in. Thick, gray. It crawled across the floor with living tendrils encircling my feet. And in that fog, I saw a pair of bare, small feet. Someone was standing right in front of me, though I had never heard the door open. "Did you read my memo?" a quiet, childish voice asked. "There was no seventh rule. No, I am going to write it now." "Are you listening? Can you feel the room getting colder? This isn't just a story. It is a warning. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen a city that isn't on any map? In the next part, I will tell you what was inside those empty concrete shells, and why Captain Kolesnikov was so afraid of a child's voice. Subscribe so you don't miss part 3. Only 4 steps left until the end. If, of course, the end even exists. Underscore 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 underscore. I stared at those bare feet, sinking into the gray fog, and felt something inside me finally snap. My rationality, that thin, brittle sheet of ice I had been standing on, gave way. The feet were pale, nearly translucent, and they didn't touch the floor. They hovered inches above the linoleum, which began to bloom with a fractal pattern of frost beneath them. 7, the voice rasped. It wasn't a child's voice anymore. It was the sound of an archivist's fingers tearing through brittle, century-old vellum. Rule number 7. If you hear your name in the rhythm of the wheels, you're no longer a passenger. You're part of the route. I tried to scream, but my throat felt as if it had been packed with dry, alkaline dust. The figure in the fog began to distend, stretching upward, taking the shape of something wrong. It wasn't a human. It was a jagged heap of rotting personnel files, bound together by rusted barbed wire that mimicked the anatomy of a man. Instead of a head, there was a shredded paper bag, leaking that same suffocating stench of a damp basement and decomposing cellulose. I bolted for the door. To hell with the MGB. To hell with the shadows. I needed to breathe, even if it was the ozone-slick metallic air of the corridor. I burst out and stopped, dead. The corridor of wagon number 0 had transformed. It was infinite. The ceiling lights didn't flicker anymore. They burned with a violent, bruised purple glare, turning the hallway into a long, throbbing throat. Compartment doors stretched into the distance, each bearing a brass plate. 1937, 1941, 1953, underscore 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 dates. The years when the country choked on its own blood and fear. The train wasn't just heading to Vladivostok. It was stitching through time, gathering every shadow that had failed to find peace. "Stop!" I shouted at myself, clutching the handrail. The metal seared my palm with a sub-zero burn. I looked out the corridor window. We were passing the Khrushchev blocks again. They were closer now, close enough for me to see the spiderweb cracks in the concrete and the faded curtains in the kitchens. And the people, God, the people, thousands of them stood on the balconies. They had no faces, only those same white, glowing pits I had seen on the conductor. Every single one of them tracked the train's movement, in sync, rhythmic.
turning their heads in a mechanical clicking sweep as we roared past. Suddenly, the train began to decelerate. The screech of the brakes sounded like 1,000 wounded animals being ground into a pulp. The sound vibrated in my teeth, making my gums ache. Asterisk. If the silence becomes too loud... The thought surfaced, but there was no silence. There was a cacophony. The whispers of millions from the empty houses outside merged with the mechanical howl of the train. Article 125, I screamed into the void of the hallway. Citizens of the USSR are guaranteed freedom of speech, freedom of the press! I ran, past doors marked with dates of execution, past shadows that now stood openly in the doorways, hands pressed rigidly to the seams of their greatcoats. They didn't try to stop me. They just watched. Their gazes felt like physical blows to my spine. I reached the vestibule. The iron door was matted with frost. I wrenched the handle. Where are you going, Comrade Andre? The conductor was standing directly behind the door. She was taller now. Her uniform seemed woven from the very fog that swirled outside. She reached out, and I saw that her fingers were long, sharpened nibs of antique fountain pens. A thick, black fluid, like India ink, dripped from the tips. Your ticket is only valid to Nameless Lagoon Station, but we passed that long ago. You slept through your reality. Get away from me. I swung at her, but my fist passed through a pocket of freezing mist. Look at your hands, she whispered. I looked. The skin on my palms had turned the color of ash. On my fingertips, letters began to surface. Sharp, typographic ligatures, asterisk, BY, ORDEROFTHEUSSR. My veins were pulsing with ink. I was becoming a document. Another page to be filed, stamped, and hidden behind the paneling of Wagon number 0. The terror was so sharp, I stopped feeling the cold. I spun around and sprinted toward the rear of the train. I knew there had to be a last car, a dead end, or an exit. I tore through the dining car. The tables were set. On the plates lay slabs of gray stone, neatly sliced like sausage. Red, rust-colored liquid frothed in the glasses. Officers sat at the tables in silence. They were eating the stones, and the sound of their jaws was the sound of a rock crusher. One of them looked up. His mouth was stitched shut, with thick black thread, but he managed to force out a sound. "Checkmate, Lieutenant." I burst onto the open platform between the cars. The wind whistled through the gaps with a razor's edge. The roar of the wheels was deafening. I looked down at the coupling. Below us, between the rails, there were no sleepers. There was a river of human faces. Millions of them fused into a single, endless stream, serving as the roadbed for this train. And then I saw him. At the very end of the train, on an open freight platform, stood a figure. Massive, looming in a long coat that billowed in the wind like the wings of a predatory bird. The figure had no head. In its place, hovering above the collar, was a giant, rusted station clock. The hands were spinning backward in a frantic, blurred circle. The train began to lean. We were entering a curve that shouldn't exist on a flat plane. The whole world began to tilt toward that zone of meaning exclusion. The Khrushchev blocks began to grow, their gray walls rising until they blotted out the sky. "Rule number 5, I screamed, losing my balance. "Do not look! Close the curtain!" But there were no curtains here. Only the open platform and that thing with a clock for a face. The hands on the dial suddenly snapped to a halt. Exactly at 3:47. Everything froze. The faces below stopped flowing. The wind died. And in that absolute dead silence, I heard a door open behind me. "Andre!" The voice was my own, but it came from deep inside the car. Andre, help me. I am stuck inside the mirror.
I turned and saw myself. I was standing in the doorway, but my face. It was drawn in charcoal on a flat, white surface. The eyes were just two heavy black dots. In that second, the train began to fall. Not off the rails. It began to fall, through the very texture of reality, tearing it like wet paper. "Welcome home," the clock had said. And then everything vanished. Are you still here? Do you hear my voice? Or is it just an echo in your own skull? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever felt your reflection in the mirror blink a split second after you do? In the next part, we will find out what lies inside those hollow concrete shells, and whether one can negotiate with a creature that has a 1952 train schedule in place of a heart. Leave a like if your hands haven't turned to paper yet. We are at the center of the nightmare now. Part 4 is coming. If time even means anything anymore. Underscore 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 underscore. I didn't die. Although God knows in that moment of falling, I prayed for only one thing: a clean, instantaneous end. For the steel to crush my bones, and for the dark to swallow my consciousness before I could realize where exactly we were crashing. But wagon number 0 had other plans. The fall didn't end with an impact. It ended with a silence so absolute I could hear the electrical hum of my own nervous system. I opened my eyes and found myself sprawled on a cold concrete floor. The air smelled of damp plaster, old chalk, and something metallic and corrosive, as if someone had just ruptured a tanker of industrial printer's ink nearby. I stood up, my head spinning in nauseating circles. I was in a room, a standard Soviet dvushka apartment, one of those concrete boxes I had seen from the train window. Floral wallpaper faded to the color of bruised skin. A heavy oak sideboard with cloudy glass protecting a yellowed tea set. But outside the window there was no sun, not even the dark of night. There was only the mogla, a gray, vibrating nothingness, where the ghost shapes of other apartment blocks occasionally drifted by. I stepped toward the window and recoiled. My reflection in the glass. It wasn't just lagging, it was independent. My double stood with his back to me, meticulously scratching words into the wallpaper with his fingernails. "You are not a guest here, Andre," a voice rasped behind me. I spun around. Standing in the kitchen doorway was Captain Kolesnikov, but the MGB officer was gone. His uniform was a shredded ruin, and from the rents in the fabric, instead of flesh, protruded tightly wound coils of magnetic tape that hissed like vipers. His face had sagged, his skin the texture of ancient newsprint, and his eyes... God, his eyes had been replaced by 2 copper coins, minted in 1952, dull with green oxidation. "Captain, where are we? Where's the train?" My voice broke into a dry, papery wheeze. He exhaled a plume of thick, black smoke. It didn't dissipate. It settled on the floor in heavy, oily droplets that looked like crude oil. The train moved on. The Moscow-Vladivostok route is merely a headline. We are inside the body now, the body of the great experiment. Do you know why they classified this project in 52? He took a step toward me. His boots hit the floor with the sound of a hammer striking dry bone. They wanted to build the perfect society, but they realized that human flesh is too brittle. It breaks, it feels, it fears, so they decided to translate us into information, statistics, documents. The city is a gargantuan archive. Every room is a life, bound in concrete and paper. He held out his hand. On his palm sat the Black King, carved from bone. Shall we play? If you win, I show you the door to the engineer's cabin. If you lose, you become another paragraph in rule number 5. "I'm not playing your games!" I screamed, lunging for the front door. I wrenched the handle. Beyond the door, there was no hallway, no stairwell. There was another car, but it wasn't wagon number 0. It was a factory floor, an infinite, vanishing hall where thousands of manual typewriters were clattering in a deafening mechanical pulse. Asterisk, clack, 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 clack. The rhythm was perfect. It was the exact cadence of the train wheels on the rails. I ran between the rows of machines. Paper erupted from them in endless, curling ribbons, lashing around my legs like white snakes. I felt the edges of the sheets slicing into my skin, but no blood followed. Instead, a thick, black ink seeped from the cuts. I looked at my hands. My fingers were flattening. My bones were turning into stiff cardboard. I was losing my volume. I was becoming two-dimensional. "Help! Someone!" I burst through another bulkhead and found myself in the dining car. But the tables were bolted directly to the rails, which now curved up into the ceiling. The faceless passengers sat there, clutching heavy silver cutlery. They weren't eating stones anymore. They were eating each other. Methodically, they tore strips of papery flesh from their neighbors, chewing with a dry, rustling sound. The conductor stood in the center of the car. Her beret had fused with her skull, and instead of hair, rusted barbed wire sprouted from beneath the fabric. She held a silver tray. On it lay my own heart. It had been fashioned from a crumpled copy of the passenger memorandum, and it was still pulsing. "Tea without sugar, Comrade Andre?" Her voice echoed directly inside my brain. "Or will you choose the sugar? Choice is an illusion of the system. In wagon number 0, there's only the directive." She stepped toward me, and the floor beneath my feet began to liquefy into a viscous mire of recycled wood pulp. I was sinking. The cellulose slurry filled my mouth, my ears, my eyes. I tasted chlorine in a century of dust. Then I saw him again. The creature, with the clock face, stood at the far end of the car. The hands on its face were spinning so fast, they had become a blur of shimmering light. "Time has been frozen by order of the party," I choked out, using the last of my breath, clinging to Kolesnikov's words like a lifeline. The world buckled. The typewriters went silent. The passengers froze with strips of paper hanging from their mouths. The conductor crumbled into a pile of gray ash. I clawed my way out of the paper sludge and found myself in a narrow, industrial crawl space. It was dark, smelling of scorched oil and white-hot metal. This was the spine of the train, the place where reality ground against the mechanics of horror. Ahead, at the end of the passage, a dim light flickered. A door bore a heavy steel plate. "Machine room. No unauthorized entry." I moved toward the light. Every step was an ordeal. My body felt like thick, parched cardstock that might tear at the slightest tension. I reached the door and pressed my ear to the cold iron. From the other side came no engine roar. I heard weeping. Millions of voices fused into one infinite, agonizing moan. I threw the lever and kicked the door open. What I saw defies any rational vocabulary. There was no motor. There was a gargantuan, pulsing vortex of human shadows, their forms elongated and stretched, turning a massive flywheel. And in the center of that vortex, shackled to the control levers by heavy iron chains, sat me. Another me. He was old, thousands of years older than I could ever be. His eyes had been stitched shut with that same black thread, and his skin was composed entirely of tiny, printed text. I stepped closer and could read the first line etched across his forehead. "I found this paper behind the paneling of the bunk when the train had already cleared the Urals." My double raised his head, though he had no eyes to see me. He whispered, "Finally." You've come to relieve me. The train cannot stop. If it stops, the reality outside simply ceases to be. Sit in the chair, Andre. It is time to announce Vladivostok. In that moment, I heard the boots, the heavy, rhythmic thunder of jackboots against the deck plating behind me. Captain Kolesnikov had come for his game of chess. Do you hear that? That sound, it isn't my heart. It is the sound of a typewriter finishing your biography right now. Do you still think you are listening to this in your room? Look around. Is your shadow still where it belongs? Write your name in the comments. Just your name. I need to know who is being entered into Protocol MGLA next. In the next part, we will find out what happens when you pull the emergency brake on a train that runs through time. And remember, if you smell the sugar, it is already too late to close your eyes. We are entering the final stretch. But this route has no end, only a loop. Subscribe if you want to see this world tear itself apart in Part 5. Underscore, 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 underscore. I looked at him, at myself. A version of me turned inside out by time and horror. I felt reality begin to liquefy, like cheap celluloid film melting in an overheated projector. My double sat in the engineer's chair. His fingers had fused with the levers, resembling the gnarled roots of a diseased tree. "Look," he rasped. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of a dry leaf crumbling between a thumb and forefinger. "Look at the flywheel. This isn't mechanics. This is us." I turned my gaze toward the gargantuan vortex in the center of the hall. Millions of shadows spun there with a frantic blurring velocity. They weren't just shadows. In that whirlpool, I saw fragments of faces. I heard snatches of forgotten screams. I smelled the stagnant scent of childhood fears and decades-old grief. The flywheel hummed, a low, vibrating frequency that made my teeth begin to crumble into fine white grit. "Every revolution is a life processed into the archive," the old man continued. "Wagon number 0 doesn't transport people. It grinds them into meaning, into cold, pure information. We are the fuel, Andre, and we are the stokers." Suddenly, the door behind me buckled under a blow so violent the steel sheets groaned inward. Another strike, then another. The thunder of jackboots was now accompanied by the raspy, mechanical laughter of Captain Kolesnikov. "Citizen engineer!" he roared through the metal. "Change of the guard! Come out with your hands up! Your game is not finished!" I gripped the freezing handrail. My hands, they weren't mine anymore. The skin on my palms had grown gray and brittle, like ancient parchment. When I clenched my fist, cracks spiderwebbed up my forearm. A thick, corrosive black ink seeped from the fissures. I felt no pain, only a hollow void filling me, displacing memories of my home, my work, the smell of fresh bread, and the warmth of a human body. "What happens if I pull the brake?" I whispered, staring at the massive red lever coated in frost and a layer of dried, dark ichor. The double in the chair convulsed in silent laughter. His face, etched with the printed text of my own biography, folded into jagged creases. "There are no brakes, Andre. There is only an emergency rupture of reality. If you pull that lever, the train will derail from the tracks of time. The Memgla will flood the interior, and then Vladivostok vanishes forever. Not just for us, for everyone." The door tore from its hinges. It flew across the room, crushing instruments and snapping wires. Instead of sparks, a shower of tiny typographic ligatures rained down. Kolesnikov stood in the breach. He had become immense. His tunic was bloated. Behind him, hundreds of thin, spider-like mechanical arms swayed, each clutching a smoldering Bellamore cigarette. In place of a face, he now had a single, solid, copper coin. The USSR coat of arms shimmered on the metal surface. "The game is over, Andre." The coin on his face remained motionless, but his voice vibrated through the very air. "You have violated Protocol Number 4. You have looked into the machine room. By the laws of wartime..." He took a step. The floor groaned and sagged under his mass. The spindly arms behind him twitched, reaching for me. I smelled scorched rubber and the metallic tang of old fear. I looked at the old man in the chair. He simply closed his stitched eyes. He was waiting. "Time has been frozen by order of the party," I screamed, lunging for the lever. Kolesnikov bellowed. His mechanical limbs lunged, searing my skin with a sub-zero chill and the sharp scent of bleach. One of them clamped onto my shoulder. I heard a dry snap. My cardboard joint had failed. I fell to my knees directly before the lever. Black ink splashed across the red metal. "You will not leave," the captain wheezed, leaning over me. His copper face disc was inches from mine.
I could see every stalk of wheat in the emblem, every detail of the sickle and hammer. They looked alive. They looked like squirming worms. In that moment, I realized it. The directive. Rule number 2. Asterisk. The logic of the system is your only shield. If I am part of the system, if I am the text, then I can rewrite the ending. I gripped the lever with my remaining hand. The metal was so cold, my palm froze to it instantly. I felt the frost climbing my veins, turning the ink inside me to ice. "Article 126, I gasped, staring into the captain's copper eyes. "The right to rest." Kolesnikov froze. The rigid logic, embedded in his nightmare form, suffered a terminal glitch. In that brief hesitation lay my only hope. I threw my weight against the lever and pulled. A sound erupted that I cannot call a noise. It was the sound of the sky tearing open. The entire length of Wagon Number 0 bucked and reared like a dying beast. Centrifugal force flung me toward the vortex of shadows. I saw Captain Kolesnikov's body begin to disintegrate into individual letters, swept away by the gale. I saw my double in the chair finally crumble into a heap of dust, exhaling one last breath of relief. The car began to pull apart. The ceiling was ripped away, and the abyss opened above me. But it wasn't a sky. It was an infinite, blindingly white page. Someone, or something immense, began to write a single word across the horizon. "Finance!" I fell upward, directly into that white void. The last thing I felt was an ice-cold hand seizing my ankle. I looked down. From the wreckage of the train, from the thick of the shadows, rose the creature with the clock face. The hands on its dial were no longer frozen at 3:47. They were showing the current time, your time. "The route is not finished, Andre," the clock whispered. "We are simply changing the paper." I kicked free, leaving my paper foot in its claws, and plummeted into the blinding, searing whiteness. "Are you listening? Are you still here? Look at your hands." "No, really, look at them right now. Do you see those small dark spots on your fingertips? You think it is just dirt or ink from a pen. I am sitting here in this empty white space, writing this to you. I don't know how I arrived here, but I know one thing. Wagon Number 0 is still moving, and it is coming for you. Tell me in the comments, do you hear the rhythm of the wheels right now? Do you have a clock in your room? If it is ticking too loudly, do not turn around. In the final part, we will find out what actually happened on that platform in Vladivostok, and which of us, me or you, is reading this text, and which is writing it. This is the end. But the end in our protocol always has a false bottom. Subscribe if you want to know the truth you can never wake up from. Underscore, 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 underscore. I thought I had woken up. You know that sensation after a long, suffocating nightmare? When you open your eyes and the world feels so blinding, so undeniably real that you want to weep with pure, unadulterated joy. I didn't feel cold iron or the viscous sludge of wood pulp beneath me. I felt a hard, wooden bench. My nostrils were hit by the scent of salt water, cheap diesel, and fried dough. The ordinary, living, human smells of a city. I opened my eyes. Above me was the soaring vault of a railway station, concrete and glass. Gray morning light filtered through the grimy panes. A sunrise. A real, honest sunrise in the year 2024. On the departure board, blinking in harsh red digits, were the words, asterisk, train 2002. Moscow, Vladivostok, arrival, 6:12. Asterisk. I was sitting on the platform. People were moving all around me. Ordinary people in puffers and coats, dragging rolling suitcases, their faces buried in the blue light of their smartphones. No greatcoats, no copper coins for eyes. I took a ragged breath, and the air seared my lungs with the genuine, frost-nipped chill of the Primorye region. I looked at my hands. They were normal. Human skin, fine lines, a small scar on my index finger from a childhood accident. No ink, no typographic ligatures. I touched my leg. My foot was there, encased in a standard sneaker, not a cardboard prosthesis. God, it's over, I whispered, and the tears began to track down my face. It was just a breakdown, a hallucination, oxygen deprivation in a rotting car. I stood up, my legs trembling. I needed to get away from the tracks, away from the rhythmic clatter of metal. I headed toward the city exit, but then I remembered. Rule number 6. Asterisk. When the train stops and you hear the announcer's voice, ensure that the people waiting on the platform have faces. I stopped dead. The fear I thought I'd left in the machine room pierced the back of my skull like a needle of ice. I began to scan the crowd, a man with a newspaper. He had a face, stubble, tired eyes, a woman with a child, a face. She was smiling, adjusting the boy's scarf. An old taxi driver, holding a sign. A face. I let out a shuddering breath of relief. Nonsense. It was all just a horror story my mind had constructed from a scorched piece of paper. I was steps away from the glass doors of the station when I saw him. In the corner, leaning against a pillar, stood a man. He wore an old gray overcoat that looked too heavy, too dense for the morning air. He wasn't watching the trains. He was staring directly at me. And he had no face. No, it wasn't smooth skin. It was worse. In place of a face was a page from the newspaper Asterisk Pravda Asterisk, dated October 1952. The text was moving. The letters were rearranging themselves, twitching to form the suggestion of a mouth and hollow eye sockets. I froze. The world around me began to bleed its color. The sounds of the station, the announcements, the footsteps, the hum of voices went flat, as if they were being played back from a warped, magnetic tape. The people around me kept moving, but their motions became jagged, stuttering, like a silent film with missing frames. "You forgot to return your linens, Citizen Andre," a voice said directly behind my ear. I spun around. The conductor. She was standing a foot away. In her hands was a stack of blindingly white sheets. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't fabric. They were blank sheets of paper. Heavy, high-grade stock. "Where am I?" I screamed, backing toward the doors. "I got out! I'm on the platform! This is Vladivostok!" Vladivostok is not a location, she whispered, and her service beret began to rotate slowly on her head like a dial. Vladivostok is the end of the report, and your report has not been accepted. It contains too much creative liberty. She stepped toward me, and I saw that beyond the glass doors of the station, there was no city. There was no Golden Horn Bay, no bridges, no hills. There was only the Ongla, a gray, infinite void where fragments of sentences, punctuation marks, and uneven lines of text drifted like ash. I looked at the arrival board. The digits were spinning frantically until they snapped into place. 347, always 347. I understood then. I hadn't escaped. The machine room, Captain Kolesnikov, the fall upward, it was all just another chapter. The train cannot stop because the rails are fused into a perfect circle. Wagon number 0 asterisk is asterisk my entire life. Everything I remembered before that moment, my childhood, my career, my home, it was all just a prologue written to ensure I would be on that bunk on that night. I looked down at my hands. This time they didn't turn to paper, they began to vanish. My fingers were becoming translucent, dissolving into a faint haze of ozone. "Do you know why I'm telling you this story?" I said, looking no longer at the conductor, but directly at asterisk, you asterisk. Yes, you! The one listening to these words right now. I'm not sitting at a station. I'm sitting inside your consciousness. Every word I speak is another revolution of the flywheel in the machine room. You listened for too long. You breathed in the scent of ozone and sugar right along with me. You closed your eyes when I asked you to. You became my co-author. And in wagon number 0, the co-author is always the next passenger. Do you hear it? That sound. It isn't interference in your headphones. It is the rhythm of the wheels. Train Vandeseren 2 has just arrived at your station. The doors are sliding open. I can smell the sugar. It's right here, next to me. It's filling my lungs. The conductor is already walking down the hallway of your home. She won't knock, she will just enter. "Andre," she called, and this time in her voice I heard asterisk, your asterisk voice. I looked at the page I'm holding. There is only one line left, and it is being written right now as you listen. Asterisk. The passenger listened to the story until the end. Now it is his turn to board wagon number 0. Don't look out the window. Don't look at your shadow. And most importantly, when she offers you the tea, don't ask how much sugar is in it, because time has been frozen. By order of the party. Forever. A long pause. Only the distant, fading rhythm of wheels is heard, followed by a faint, barely audible whisper. 347. 347. There. Now you know the truth. If you can still hear me, write your name and your city in the comments. I need to know where the train is located now. And if you are truly afraid, do not turn off the sound. The silence in this car is far more dangerous than my words. Like this, if you can also smell the ozone. Subscribe, if you think you'll make it to the next station in time, but we both know that the next station does not exist. Underscore, 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 underscore.